Hi, I'm Becky Johnson with Sweetheart Quilt Design Company, and today we're doing the third in our series of 8 videos on binding. So today we're going to talk about bias binding, and there's a couple of reasons why you might want to use a bias binding. One is if you have a stripe or a plaid, just because rather than just having it go straight, you would have it go on an angle, and it looks cool. So that's a fun reason. Some people are a proponent of always using bias binding because they say it wears better. So when you have a straight cut binding, if it's getting worn, if it gets a lot of wear around the edges, you're always wearing on the same thread. So if that thread gets broken, it can open up. If you're use a bias binding, then your threads are going this way and this way. So even though it's wearing on the edge, it's wearing on a different thread every single time. So you're not going to have the split open. So that's a good reason to use a bias binding. I still use a straight cut binding most of the time unless there's another reason. Now another reason to use a bias binding is if you have curves. And we'll talk about that in video number 8. We'll talk about how to put binding on curves, like if you're doing a double wedding ring, or I have a favorite table runner pattern that has curves in it. So we'll talk about how to do that correctly. So right now what we're going to do is talk about how to calculate how much fabric you need and how to cut it and sew it and press it. So with this, the quilt that I'm figuring this binding for, it's 47 by 59. So we're computing the perimeter. We're taking 47, which is the top and bottom, times 2, and 59, which is the 2 sides, times 2. We come up with 212 for the total perimeter. We're going to divide by 40 because that's if you're using with the fabric minus the seam. So that gives us a good estimate of how many strips we need. So then you round up, so that would be 6 times 2.5, so you need 15 inches. And then I always buy a little extra so that I can straighten up, and in case my ruler slips and I have to cut an extra strip. So I'd buy ½ yard. Now, when I'm doing bias binding, I add another 1/8 of a yard to that. And it's not that it takes any more fabric to do a bias binding. It doesn't actually. But when you're cutting it this way, you can see when you get to the edge here, you're working with pretty short strips. And that's a lot of seams, and it's a lot more work, and it doesn't look as good and lay as well. So if we get the extra 1/8 of a yard, then we end up with longer strips. So for this, I'm using 5/8 of a yard. Now, the first thing you want to do is make sure you iron out the bolt fold, which I already did. And then we're going to take this and fold it at a right angle. Since I have stripes here, it makes it kind of easy to get it straight. And you want to make this the easiest for yourself, you want this distance and this distance to be close to the same. So I'm lining up on one of the, before you do this, make sure your edges are straight. I had already done that. So make sure your edges are straight. Do a cleanup cut on both sides. So now you can see that for me to cut these on the bias like this would be very awkward. But if you take this, make sure you pinch it tight so you don't lose this edge, and press it in half. And then you can fold it up like this. And this is a much more manageable thing to cut right here, this distance. Now, one of the make sure you don't switch folds. If you go to this fold and cut them, you'll end up with binding strips that look like this, and you'll have to cut them apart, and the stripes will go different ways on each piece, so just don't do it. So what we're going to stick with our original fold, and I'm going to come over here and just I'm going to line up down here with a line on the ruler and cozy up to this fold, and I'm going to go ahead and cut it off. Okay? And then I'm going to turn my mat because of the way I laid this out. I don't want to pick it up. So then we're going to start cutting 2.5-inch strips. Now, one of the things that people tend to do when they're doing bias binding is they cut way too much. So I'm going to show you how to avoid that. So I'm still lining up with my 2.5 inches. And as long as I don't get to the selvage edge here, all these strips are the same length. So I can cut all the way to here, to that selvage. Sorry, I'm just a little bit off my mat here. Scooch this up. Oops. Scooch both pieces up. And get the, I can see where it was supposed to cut. Okay, so if I take these pieces, and you'll see, they don't look like they're the same length, but when you lay them out like this, they're the same length. And all of these pieces are the same length. So then I take my ruler and I measure the middle of the strip. Come in just a little bit because I'm going to put seam allowance in there. All right, so I'm going to put my finger right here where it hit 24 inches. And then I've got 7 more. So that's 31 inches. So I have 6 strips because I'm cutting them 2 at a time at 31 inches. That makes 186 inches of binding that I have. So my goal is 212, a little more than that. So I'm going to go ahead and cut another strip here. And then that should be enough. We'll measure this. And we've got selvage on there. I'll show you how to deal with that. And you can see these aren't the same length anymore. This one's shorter. So the bottom one is about 26 inches and the top one is about 27. So we've got plenty now. We're way up over our 212. So that's where I'm going to stop cutting. But you can see that 1/8 of a yard made quite a bit of difference. Otherwise, we would have had strips this long. Now, we're going to sew these together. And with a stripe like this, you've got a couple of choices. You can see because my stripe went this way on the fabric, parallel to the selvage, all my pieces look like this. So, and my stripe is not a repetitive stripe. So I can look at this and figure out where I want to match that. And I might take the other end. Nope, this end. And this will actually take me quite a ways back into the fabric before I get it matched. So another choice is to sew parallel to the stripes. And that's what I'm going to do because the match is so far back. So I'm going to, oh wait, it matched right there. Huh, I just wasn't, yeah, because that looks different color, but this stripe changes colors. Okay, never mind. This matches right here. So I can go straight through, get my ruler so you know. I can go straight through right here and then my designs will match on my binding. And you may or may not care about that. I think this kind of thing is fun to do. So I like to match them up. Okay, and then I'm gonna go ahead and start sewing these on the angle. I'm going to feed it in right there where they crisscrossed and come out the other side where they crisscrossed. Now, we don't have that when we do the straight ones. We have a nice little stack. So just get the other one out of the way so you make sure you don't sew a big circle. All right, so let me see on this one. Oh, I need the other end. You can see how when I line this up, see that blue one, the white stripes on the other side. So that's how I know I have to go to the other end. So the white stripe will be on the same side. So I can go ahead and line this up again like that and go ahead and sew that. And it's a good thing we cut a little extra fabric. I always like to do that on bias binding because we're losing a few inches with this overlap. Okay, so this is the piece we're working with. The blue stripe is just a different color at this point. Okay, so we're lining up. I can line up right at the edge, but I'm going to sew from this crisscross to that one. Now, if you're not using a stripe, you obviously can just sew end to end. You don't have to work as hard as when I'm working. If you're just using a solid fabric or a print or something. But it's fun to know how to do this with a stripe. Now this one, because we have the selvage edge. Whew. Ah, there we go. No, it's way back here. Let me see if this one's any easier. Okay, we're gonna have to go back quite a ways to get this to line up. Oh, that's still not the right place. All right, let me see how far back I can push this. Okay, so I had to lose quite a bit on that one to get those stripes matched up. So I'm glad I had quite a few extra inches. Okay, this is trickier because let me just cut this the other way so that I have an edge to work with. And I'm lining up on the edge over here so that I have an edge to work with to match up. Yep, quite a bit. All right, now we just need to trim these off. So I'm just going to basically take the dog ear off there and trim this, and take the dog ear off at that end. Get my scraps out of the way here, and then just work my way through. The nice thing about it is if you happen to sew it the wrong way, you can't trim it. It just doesn't trim because you got those legs sticking out. And we've all done it. One quilt I had 5 seams and I sewed the first one correctly and the next 4 wrong. Few more seams to put together a bias binding, because you notice when we measured those pieces they were 31 inches long, the long ones, and when you're cutting with the fabric your strips are more like 42 inches. So there's a few more seams, but it's well worth the effort. I mean, you can buy more fabric, it just leaves you with more leftovers in the shape of a triangle. All right, so now we're gonna iron this. Find an end here. I usually like on this where some of the strips are shorter. Let's see, I start with the long ones because then when I roll it up, I'll be starting with longer strips. And in case I don't use the shorter ones at the end. All right, so there's our nice little match that we did on the seam. I think the stuff like that's fun to do, so I do stuff. A lot of people wouldn't take the time, but for just a few minutes, your binding just looks that much better. Now, when you're working with a bias binding, it's a little stretchy because it's on bias. So you do have to be careful not to stretch it as you're putting it on, to let your sewing machine feed the strips in and not pull on them. Okay, and then I like to go ahead and wind up my binding because it's easy to save that way. If you just put it in a crinkly mess, then you have to iron the whole thing again. So what I do is I just put it on my hand and just start wrapping, and you'll notice that it begins to twist. So if you switch hands, then it twists the other direction to get through the first tighter twist, and then it'll go real easily for me. Now when it starts to twist up again, you just switch back hands. Now it's really important when you make a quilt that you buy the binding at that time, because the teal that's available this year will be a slightly different shade next year, and you won't be able to find it. And the other thing that's very important is to go ahead and make your binding so that you don't grab that piece of fabric and put it in another quilt and put yourself right back in the same position of not having bought it. So, and then good idea to label it or make sure you store it with your quilt if you don't have it quilted right away. if you send it off to a quilter, then make sure you get it labeled. All right, that's how you do a bias binding. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.